Welcome back, one and all, to Chapter 4 of the Chronicles of the Grand Librarian. Chapter 4 is named Encounters. Topaz sighed to herself as she got the refugees that Crimson Mask had captured into beds, Library turning one of her many rooms into a makeshift infirmary. Topaz thanked her breathlessly as she left the room to let the refugees rest. She rested a hand against her forehead, feeling it pulse and throb as she sat down on a cushioned chair in one of the library's many reading rooms. She needed to recover herself, not that she'd ever admit it, especially not to her father, whom she told she'd be able to handle herself in Topaz City. The father whom she told she'd call for help if she ever needed it. No, she could not show any ounce of weakness when he got back. She'll need to save her energy to explain why she shouldn't be sent back to her mother. Oh, you really stepped in it this time, Topaz. Never mind if Dad finds out about you fooling around with known criminals, even ones on the mend. How are you going to convince him Mom wasn't right about you needing someone to watch you? She said aloud to herself as she slumped in the comfy chair. Silently, a small chairside table moved next to her. A cup of hot chocolate and a cinnamon roll sat atop fine china, as if to invite the young woman to drink and eat the pastry and beverage. Topaz smiles gently as she takes a bite of the cinnamon roll and sips the cocoa. Memories of joyful times with her father and mother, and these sweet treats filling her mind. Thanks, Library. I wish you could talk to me, because right now I feel really lost on what to do. A blanket floats from nearby and lands on her lap, the cinnamon roll and cocoa perfectly avoided by the self-moved cloth. Topaz smiled gently as she continues to enjoy the treat. She leans deeper into the cushy chair as she begins to drift. Her eyelids slowly became heavier and heavier. Night, Library. Keep an eye on those kids for me, she murmured before she drifted off into sweet rest. As she drifts off, she hears a chime, a cheerful, soothing sound, and can't help a small smile as she falls asleep, only to open her eyes in what felt like seconds. Though the library looked different, the bright lights gave off only an eerie glow. She swore she saw the brief dart of a spider. She knew that was impossible. Spiders and other bugs weren't able to enter the library, but she still felt uneasy, like she was not alone. Do not fear, child. I heard you needed someone to talk to. A small, sweet voice cut through the eerie darkness, followed immediately by more darts. Presumably, whatever creature that spoke moved closer. Soon, a shadow jumped across Topaz's field of view, landing on the little table next to her. It was a gilded spider, seemingly made of finery, inlaid jewels for eyes, the tips of its legs ending in ballpoint pen tips. Whoa! You're so pretty. What are you? Topaz's nerves melted, seeing the rather cute and beautiful creature. The spider-like being of gold posed happily at the praise and adoration, seemingly pleased with this result. I am Anna. I have chosen this form to be soothing to you. I'm glad it has succeeded, the little creature responded, clicking its two front legs together. The spider then did a small bow motion. The two legs flared out in front of it, looking up at Topaz with its bejeweled eyes. Topaz not even noticing how unusually calm she was as she talked to the gilded spider. Now, why don't you tell me what's gotten you so jumpy? Anna asked gently. Its pen-tipped legs moved underneath it. Paper grabbed and then scribbled on as it spoke, as if it wanted to write down the conversation it had with Topaz. Topaz noticed this, but did not seem to register it fully. Her answer was non-hesitant, as if automatic. I really messed up. I told my dad I could handle going solo. Then I didn't call for help and I got captured. And I think Dad nearly killed someone. Topaz hung her head as she remembered limping alongside Owlette into the room where two of the Crimson Masks were being held by their necks by her father. He didn't seem to realize she was already there and only let go at the encouragement of a fellow hero. Do not blame yourself. It is natural for a father to be rough on people who hurt his child, the spider said soothingly again. Once more, the calm and soothing effect allowing Topaz to relax from her tense state. She looked at the spider scribbling on a piece of paper, then around the library, only now noticing how dark it was, how warped the wood seemed to be. Is this a dream? She finally asked, standing up from the comfy chair now. She looked around the familiar yet strange environment, and only now noticed that tables weren't where they were originally, and the vibrant purple of the floors replaced with deep indigo. The lanterns that lined the place only served to make the shadows dance, instead of banish them like they would normally. Hmm, we're in the dream realm, but this doesn't feel random enough. There's still far too much structure. If I were to guess, I'd say we're in a psychic imprint, like a dream world footprint made by powerful entities. The spider mused, its pen-like legs wrapping the paper up and stringing it to its back. In a swift hop, it lands atop Topaz's head. Topaz stepped out of the reading nook into the library proper to find the warped wood and the swirling shadows go through the whole thing. This is odd. I remember Dad talking about places like this, but he never mentioned there was one of the library. Topaz murmured as she walked around the warped mirror of the library. Going to the infirmary, she was relieved to see the fugitives still there, peacefully asleep. That is odd. Usually places like this have some form of conduit. I just kind of drift through the dream realm for ideas. But you were likely pulled here for a reason. Something or someone. The golden spider jumped from Topaz's head to the sleeping forms of the fugitives. She moved over all of them as if performing an inspection before she returned to Topaz. They don't appear to be close to waking. Is someone else here? Well, the library itself is a conscious being, but I assume if she was the one to pull me here, she would have said so by now. Right? Topaz scratched her head through her gemstone hair, leaving the infirmary to look around the building more. She pondered what else could do such a thing while her father was away, and then her eyes lit up with an idea. Oh, I know. There's a bunch of artifacts. Maybe one of them called me in here, she finally said, heading for the stairs to seek out the artifacts. Due to the warped nature of the stairs, she had to jump over large gaps. Thankful her powers seemed to still work in this realm, but still cautious not to rely on them too much in unfamiliar territory. Ooh, artifacts, you say? How intriguing. What kind of artifacts? More books? Swords? Staves? Little Spider spoke giddily now, splaying out its knot paper on top of Topaz's head and furiously taking notes. Topaz giggled a bit, finding this behavior endearing as she made her way up to the artifact floor. Like the floors below it, there were shelves as far as the eye can see, but unlike the floors lined with books, there were also display cases for objects of greater power. In one of the display cases sat a Chinese instrument made of jade, a Chpater, which glowed faintly as Topaz approached it with a smile. One would when greet approached it with a smile one would when greeting an old friend. Hello, you. It's been a while. I know your legends say you can induce sleep. Are you the one that called me here? Topaz asked softly, pressing it. She pressed a hand against the display glass. She had often been drawn to the Upipa as a child, talking with it whenever she managed to sneak to the artifact floor. Hello, young one. I'm afraid not. Something far older than I seeks your attention, but it is nice to see you again, nonetheless. The voice of the instrument played out a melodious Chinese. Topaz smiled warmly as she listened to it. She felt lighter in the presence of someone she considered an old friend. Upipa continued to speak to her. But I know where the one who did is. Continue to the very back of this floor, child. The very back? I've never been that far. All right, thank you, Peepa. She gives a small bow before she rushed off, giving waves at the magical artifacts that greet her as she passes by. The little spider on her head furiously taking notes as she ran deeper and deeper into the dream version of the artifact floor. There, placed against the wall, she found not another display case, but a pedestal. An innate purple and, and gold and silver pedestal with a staff that floated above it. The staff's manticore top was made from a carefully crafted and shaped purple crystals, the edges lined with a cosmic shade of green, and the eyes shone a bright golden silver. It sat on top of a staff that shined with purple. Intricate gold and silver patterns covered it, with dashes of bright, glowing green energy that flowed around it like a time stream. It turned, the eyes of the manticore flashing as it began to speak. A harsh, coarse voice echoed from it. Child of Tereus, thank you for heeding my call. A voice echoed from the staff. It was soft and fatherly, but aged, like an older uncle or a grandfather. The mouth of the manticore top glowed softly as it spoke to Topaz. Topaz racked her brain for the name of this staff, but came up empty. She had a hard time believing there was an object in this section that she didn't know about. Forgive me, but what is your name? Topaz said softly. She felt extremely impolite, her need to ask proof she didn't recognize this obviously fantastic staff. Though instead of shock or ridicule, the answer came in the same soft, gentle, and old voice as before. I am Graudet, the staff of the Grand Librarian. Long have I been sealed in place here. He responded. His voice seemed to echo through every corner of the spectral space. Topaz looked around in wonder of how he was achieving this feat before she turned her attention back to the staff, eyes now drawn to the pedestal. Instead of the inscription she expected to see, there was a blank line, like a password insert. Oh, is that why you called me over here? You need help with the password? Topaz asked. She leaned down to inspect the line for any sort of hint. She found that if she focused, the line would shift to the words, something you'll never forget, which only served to make her furrow her brow in frustration. Yes, sadly I don't know what Darius put for the password. I know it was before he met your mother, thus before they had you, so your names didn't work. Topaz nodded as she racked her brain for an idea. Her father didn't speak often of his life before her mother, but perhaps there was an old story or a passing comment that could hint to it. Meanwhile, in the Russian embassy of China, deep inside the embassy, A tubular machine whirled to life, runic letters from languages long dead swirling inside the tube as a 9-foot tall silhouette slowly stepped through the runic letters. The silhouette became more and more solid before it finally stepped out of the tube. A large, white furred, clawed foot slammed solidly against the bare floor. Another figure stands opposite the tube. This one shorter, lithe, black hair tied in a segmented ponytail that reached down to her hips. A red and gold Chpater hugged her curves but somehow hid the armor underneath. Her weapon, a silver-bladed red and gold stabbed Feng Zhu Dao, stood next to her, nearly as tall as her Ursine guest. Major Ursa, the woman stated shortly. The Ursine humanoid snorted in response, adjusting the military-grade body armor and trousers that had shifted slightly in transit. He stepped towards the woman. To the untrained eye, it looked as if his every step was a harsh stomp, but the woman didn't do so much as flinch. She simply tilted her head up to look him in the eye. After a tense second of silence, the large Russian man laughed heartily and picked up the smaller Asian woman in a literal bear hug. With a roll of her eyes, the woman laughed alongside him and returned the hug as best she could before she was let down by the Ursine Major. Dragon Empress, it has been far too long since our last mission. How's the daughter? Still the, how Americans say, gold soldier, eh? The Ursine man's voice was a gravelly but boisterous one, smirking down as he spoke in fluent, if not perfect, Chinese. The woman collecting her weapon as the two left the teleporter chamber, their conversation continued as they walked together. It seemed like we were doing better, but the last month, radio silence. I worry something has happened to her, but if I launch into America every time I think that, it could become heated for China and America. Dragon Empress responds to Major Ursa in perfect Russian, her voice as smooth and cold as her outward appearance. But there was mirth behind her eyes as she spoke with her old friend. Yeah, I know you're mad at him for not agreeing with you, but your husband would be an easy solution to that, the Russian man stated carefully, even the mountain of a man a little tense about how the Dragon Empress would respond to that comment. To his relief, she simply sighed defeatedly and nodded. I know, and I feel a bit stupid about it. I'm still not okay with it, but she's old enough that it's not my decision anymore. I'll call him after this mission. They tell you anything about it before sending you over? The woman opened the door to the briefing room for her friend, who smiled as he passed through the door. He reached back to return the favor and pressed a clawed paw to the top of said door so that she could pass through easily. Just that our ally to the south was in a bit of a pickle, Major Ursa stated as the two walked over to an old display table. Runic writing wrapped around the sides of the table, and a bespectacled Chinese man stood at attention, chin held high in his military commander garb. Once Major Ursa and the Dragon Empress had joined him at the table, he would press a button on his side, and the broadcast that the Heroes United Council had seen moments ago played out. Dragon Empress kept her expressions measured as she recognized Arthurians being held by the North Koreans. Neither her nor the Major being surprised when armies came for their refugees. Our embassy in North Korea is still functioning. For how long we cannot be certain. You will go through the teleporters as it is the swiftest form of travel between the countries. You will be met by the Republic of Korea's top metahuman at the embassy. While the assets are important, we have reason to believe these invaders will attempt to wipe the Republic of Korea off the face of planet Earth. You must prevent this at all costs. even the expense of the assets. Understood? Understood. We'll rendezvous with the Republic's representative immediately. Dragon Empress stated calmly. Major Ursa and her left in a more stoic fashion than how they entered, though they relaxed as soon as they were out of sight and earshot of the man. The sigh of the Russian man sounded more like a growl. That commander of yours always has to word things like they're not people. I suppose it helps him not to think of them like they are. Is he always acting like his pants are on too tight to Qilong? He grunted as they entered the teleporter room. Dragon Empress, full, her human name used, moved to the controls inside as she booted up the teleporter set to North Korea. Konstantin, if you gave me any amount of money each time I've seen him relax for even a millisecond, I'd be poorer than you, Kostya. Costa chuckled at the nickname and stepped towards the teleporter, holding a hand to his stomach as it rumbled mightily like rocks tumbling down a sheer cliff. Ah, Chi-Chi teleporting multiple times in a row messes with me fiercely. Let's hope this mission takes long enough to settle it. See you on the other side. With mighty steps that threatened to shake the whole room, Major Ursa stepped through the teleporter. He became a silhouette of light that slowly became less and less visible, an inverse of how he entered. One can only hope, Kostya. Chi-Chi sighed and followed suit through the teleporter. In seconds, she stepped back through the other side like a short tunnel. She smiled as she saw a woman with silver hair in a dragon-scale dress that resembles her own Chpater. A Yi-Dao sword and a Sang-So Dao hung together on her hip as she smiled at Kostya and Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi! Kostya! Thank you both for coming. I typically greet you properly, but there's little time. As she spoke, an explosion rocked the room. Kostya had to grab a few soldiers that were nearly knocked to the floor. Chi-Chi put a hand on her old friend, the Kirin Admiral, but she simply knew her as Bina. Bina, it's okay. It sounds like we need to hurry. Where are the refugees? Bina nods. She pulls the short Yi-Dao sword from her hip and motions for Chi-Chi and Kostya to follow her. The three rush down the halls of the embassy, a simple turn of their heads allowing them to see the chaos outside as giant red and gold suits of armor clash with the human military, as well as mythical creatures that had minutes ago been humanoids cloaked in silver and blue robes. The three heroes rushed out the door of the embassy, Chi-Chi and Bina flying up over the main gate. Major Ursa, who had no time to wait for the gate to be opened, crashed through with a mighty roar, claws at the ready as he stormed onto the battlefield. On the other side of the battle, Spirit of Freedom drops down onto the ground as the jet flies away from her, slamming down in between the forces of North Korea, hulking 10 feet tall mechs painted red and gold, and various animal-human hybrids that float above the ground in robes that shift and circle, somehow blocking the advanced weaponry of both the North Koreans and the engineers. Ha! Pure chaos. Now this feels like home, Spirit smirks, grabbing a nearby boulder and growing it to match the size of the mech armors. She chucks the boulder at some of the mages, who yelp in surprise as solid stone slams into their robes. And the robes, designed to fight advanced technology, buckle against the rock as they move to defend their wearers. Several of the mages slammed into the ground unconscious. As soon as they lost consciousness, several copies of them seemed to simply blink out of existence. This caught the attention of all sides, the North Koreans, the engineers, and the remaining conscious mages. Spirit grinned at them, and for a brief moment felt the North Koreans have a sense of relief that a hero had joined the combat, even if it wasn't one of theirs. She held on to this feeling and began to grow even more. She now towered over the engineers as she picked one up and punt kicked them into the air. The metal armor that towered over any other human flew over their comrades and into a tank-like structure that had begun to set up behind the engineers. With a mighty crash, the high-tech armor and the high-tech tank collided. Metal twisted in such a way to prevent the punted soldier from escape and to prevent the tank from use. As the mages that still stood got arrested by the North Korean soldiers, the metal suits of the engineers whir and clank. They quickly produced a small armory's worth of weaponry and rapidly opened fire on the giant woman. She grunts in pain as plasma and other high-tech ammo slams into her. She grins and kicks the nearest one. She once more sent them into flight. She watched as they slammed into rocks, trees, and eventually a different battlefield several yards away. A well-placed shot brought Spirit to one knee. She grabbed the engineer that hit her and slammed them into the rest, which knocked them over and did significant damage to their armors and weapons. This allowed the North Korean soldiers to capture and arrest them. They quickly dragged beings that looked human out of the metal mech suits. Spirit gave a small salute to the soldiers before she rushed over to the next battle she could see. She found another of the humanoid animals in blue and silver robes, surrounded by black inky beings that the figure, whose animal features closely resembled a wolf, seemed to summon from an inkwell they held in their hands. Spirit attempts to slam a hand through one of the inky beings, which only serves to stain her hand black, as the creature reconstitutes almost immediately. The ink-like creatures swarm Spirit, and while her hits don't connect, theirs most certainly do. The giant woman groans as the inky soldiers slam their fists into her stomach, which forces her to stumble backwards, a hand clutched to her now stained abdomen. Spirit reels both hands back and slams them together. This creates a shockwave which temporarily disperses the inky creatures. Spirit growls at the caster, which, now able to fully take them in, Spirit realized was a sort of night blue wolf woman. Spirit quickly clears the distance between the two of them and slams her fist forward. The inky soldiers reformed too late to stop her. "Oh, shield!" the wolf yelled out, a thin blue aura appearing between her and Spirit, but Spirit's fist shattered through it with the sound of 1,000 pieces of glass. Her punch connected with the caster and quickly sent her into a nearby tree. To Spirit's surprise, this does not stop the ink creatures, and in fact, seems to just piss them off, as she feels them begin to climb up her form. Their inky bodies left behind a trail of stains on her outfit on their way up. Spirit clenched her jaw to keep her mouth shut and closed her nose with one hand. Her other hand slapped and swung at the creatures to get them off. This proved ineffective against the liquid creatures, but as she busied herself, Spirit bravely heard the whir of a machine as it came to life. "Rays of frost!" a mechanical voice called out. Beams of icy blue and white energy hit the inky creatures with precision and allowed Spirit to shatter them. Spirit looked to where the beams had come from to see one of the red and gold soldiers like she had fought moments before, which confused her as to why they would help her. "I've got one question, Giant. I saw you come in on some jet that combines magic and tech, so you better answer honestly. Where did you get it?" The mechanical voice came from the mechanized helmet of the red and gold armor. Spirit looked down at the soldier, even more confused now. At Garrison Genius. Chi-Chi had separated from the other two to check on the garrison where the fight had started. The place where the location of the Imperial regalia and the refugees from the war that was waged all around her had been broadcasted for the world to see. What the woman known as the Dragon Empress saw when she arrived did not bode well. The front gate had been crushed like something heavy fell from a great height atop it. Several parts of the wall showed signs of explosive fire and frost damage, as if explosions of said elements rent them asunder. For the most worrisome thing Chi-Chi saw as she entered the grounds of the garrison was the distinct lack of bodies. There were craters, burn marks, even statues of ice that had obviously formed around a body, but all were eerily absent. Once she entered the main building of the garrison, she could hear voices from a room towards the back. Young, obviously scared voices echoed down the halls to her ears alongside an older, calmer voice. A familiar voice. "You promised you can get us to the library?" One of the refugees asked in a voice that was obviously an attempt to bite back tears. Several of the refugees had already started to sob into and clutch each other. Chi-Chi stopped so that they would not see her and listened for the response of the calmer voice. "I promise. Simply say, I wish to go to the library. The time for you all to be brave is past. You did very well." Chi-Chi's breath caught in her throat. There was no mistake. Darius's voice echoed from within the room with the refugees. She stalked closer as she heard them all say, "I wish to go to the library," one by one. She heard the somewhat familiar pulse sound of a portal, and the blorp of the portal in use as the children stepped through. Finally, with a whoosh, the portal closed, and Chi-Chi stepped through the door that separated her from the room. There stood a figure that did look a lot like her husband. His back to the door, the figure had his purple hair, if a few shades darker. The robes were similarly only a few shades darker but purple. The gold and silver patterns of the robes had several swirls of black energy within them. The biomechanical armor under the robes was more jagged and spiky. If Chi-Chi was honest, this figure looked like if someone asked a teenager to draw a Terius. Close, but too dark and edgy for anyone to anyone who knew the real thing to be fooled. The figure turned to Chi-Chi, a soft smile spreading across the most egregious difference, the midnight sky blue of his skin, dotted with numerous sparkles of stars. His eyes were almost pure black, save for swirling purple, like someone recolored a picture of a black hole to make his eyes. Now that his front faced her, Chi-Chi could tell that his arms had shifted. His right arm, still in the snap position it held to open the portal for the refugees, was swirling red and deep blue. The left arm, hung limply at his side, swirled deep black and vibrant white. Both were scaled, obviously in their dragon-like forms. Chi-Chi narrowed her eyes at the figure. She twirled her glaive as she got in a ready stance. Obvious contempt and hatred played across her usually stoic visage. "Yummy,"